She told the man in the suit to wait outside. Turns out, he owned the building. "Delivery guys need to wait outside," the receptionist said without even looking up from her phone. She twirled a piece of gum in her mouth, barely glancing at the man standing in front of her. He was wearing a dark gray suit, sharp but not flashy. Polished black shoes, a leather briefcase in one hand. Calm, confident, clean. He didn't argue. He didn't even frown. He just looked at her for a moment, gave a polite nod, and turned around. The young woman, her name was Tina Maxwell, just 3 months into the job, went back to scrolling through Instagram reels, unaware that she'd just made the kind of mistake that people talk about for years, the kind that follows you even after you leave the job. Outside the glass doors of Grafton Dynamics, a mid-sized software firm in San Mateo, California, the man calmly pulled out his phone. She hadn't asked his name. She hadn't checked the calendar. She hadn't noticed the security badge clipped to his inner jacket pocket. And most importantly, she hadn't known that the man she just sent outside was Mr. Reginald Banks, the incoming CEO of the entire company. Inside, the office was its usual mix of startup energy and light corporate chaos. People hunched over laptops in open-floor spaces, slapping keyboards and sipping from refillable water bottles. Conference rooms with names like the lab and the think tank had their blinds halfway shut. A group of marketing folks were setting up for a product demo in the common area. No one noticed anything wrong, yet. Outside, Reginald was still on the phone, speaking in a low voice. "Yeah, I just arrived. Already an issue," he said, glancing back at the lobby with a half smile. There was something powerful in how calm he was. Not a twitch of anger, not a sigh of annoyance. Just observation, stillness. He ended the call, adjusted his tie, and waited. Back inside, Tina was joined by a coworker from HR, Josh Perez, who stopped at her desk with a coffee. "You see the guest for 10 a.m. yet?" he asked. Tina blew a bubble. "Some delivery guy came in a minute ago, told him to wait outside." Josh blinked. "Wait, what did he look like?" "Dude in a suit, older, black guy, had a briefcase, why?" Josh's stomach dropped. He leaned across the counter and looked out the glass. "You didn't ask his name?" Tina shrugged. "He looked like a delivery guy, had that FedEx kind of energy, you know?" Josh didn't laugh. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. Outside, Reginald was still there, calm, watching, waiting. He wasn't just a visitor. He wasn't there for a presentation or to shake hands. He was now the majority shareholder of Grafton Dynamics after a quiet acquisition deal finalized less than 48 hours ago. And today was his first official visit as CEO. He had come to observe, to see who saw him and who didn't. But inside, panic had already begun to stir. Josh's fingers trembled slightly as he waited for the call to connect. "Hey, it's Josh from HR. Yeah, someone needs to go outside. Now, I think he's already here." He ended the call and looked at Tina. "You seriously didn't think to ask for a name?" Tina was defensive now. "How was I supposed to know? He didn't say who he was." Josh didn't argue. He just walked off fast, muttering something under his breath. A few heads turned, then a few more. Outside, Reginald checked the time on his watch. 10:03 a.m. He could see faces starting to peek out from behind blinds, a few people whispering in the hallway near the entrance. He tapped his phone again, sent a short text, then looked up at the sky like he had nowhere better to be. But he did. Inside the building, the shift was subtle, but it was real. One of the senior VPs, Lena Armstrong, came out of her glass-walled office on the second floor, phone pressed to her ear. Her eyebrows shot up. "You're joking," she said into the receiver. She moved quickly down the stairs, heels clicking with authority, past the kitchen, rounded the corner toward the front desk, her pace increasing the closer she got. She reached Tina's desk, trying to sound calm. "Where is he?" Tina blinked. "Who?" Lena didn't answer. She yanked the door open and stepped outside. Reginald turned toward her as if they'd just run into each other at a grocery store. "Ms. Armstrong," he said, his voice smooth. "I'm so sorry," she said instantly. "There was some confusion at the front." "No worries," he replied, offering a faint smile. "I was curious to see how things would go." Lena's mouth went dry. That smile, measured, quiet, felt heavier than a shout. "If you'll come in with me," she offered. Reginald nodded. As they stepped through the doors, the office space suddenly got quieter. People were pretending not to stare, but they stared anyway. A few stood up. Some stepped away from their desks. Josh watched from a distance, eyes wide. Tina, still behind the desk, looked up and froze. Reginald walked past her without breaking stride. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. The hallway to the boardroom was long, lined with old photos of the company's founders and big client wins. Reginald looked at each one as they passed. "Your front desk," he said softly, "is the face of your entire company." Lena nodded quickly. "Understood." He stopped walking. "Is it?" She hesitated. "We've been working on training. We'll revisit it. Immediately." He gave her another look. This one lasted longer. Then he resumed walking. Inside the boardroom, 3 execs were already seated. Water bottles on the table, notepads open. One guy had his laptop already connected to the screen, prepping a slideshow no one had asked for. They all stood when Reginald entered. He didn't sit right away. He looked out the window, then turned to face the room. "I won't be here long today," he said. "This isn't a formal meeting. I came to watch, observe, see who runs the engine, who actually sees people, who pays attention." No one said a word. He looked at the guy with the laptop. "You can unplug that. No presentations today." Then he sat down slowly, placed his briefcase beside him, and folded his hands. "I'll be taking meetings throughout the day, one-on-one, unannounced, casual." He paused. "Real." Back out front, Tina was trying to Google the name Reginald Banks. Her throat was dry now. She saw Lena glance at her from down the hall. A long, silent look. Tina looked at the floor. She knew. She knew she'd messed up bad. But she didn't know that the worst part was still coming. Because Reginald wasn't there to fire anyone. He was there to make people see themselves. The email hit inboxes at 10:22 a.m. Subject line, "Please welcome Reginald Banks, today's visit." It was short, no fanfare, just a quiet note from Lena Armstrong saying the new CEO would be spending the day meeting staff across departments. No need to prep, just be present. That was all it took. Within minutes, whispers started flying. "Did you meet him yet? Wait, that was him outside earlier? Yo, someone said the front desk sent him away, told him to wait outside. That true? Damn, that's wild." No one mentioned names, but everyone knew. Tina stayed glued to her desk, hands barely moving on her keyboard. The monitor in front of her blurred. Her mind was backtracking, replaying everything. The look he gave her, the way he didn't flinch, the way he just left without a word. She wanted to melt into her chair, disappear. In the product development wing, things were no better. Tariq Boone, the department lead, had just finished explaining to his team how to speak professionally during walk-by interactions when someone leaned over and whispered the news. "Mr. Banks is here?" Tariq nodded, keeping his cool. "Yup. Walked right past us about 15 minutes ago. Said he'd be back." His team stiffened. No one said it, but they were nervous. Because in this office, just like in many others, people knew what it meant when someone from the top suddenly wanted to meet the workers without a schedule. It wasn't just a visit. It was a test. In the break room, 2 interns sat frozen. "Dude," one whispered, "Tina really thought he was delivery?" The other shook her head. "Man, if I were her, I'd just quit." "She won't," said the first. "Not yet. She doesn't know what he's gonna do." Meanwhile, Reginald was walking through the finance floor with Victor Malone, a longtime director. Reginald wasn't talking much. He mostly listened. "You'll notice we try to keep things flexible here," Victor said, walking fast. "We want a culture that empowers people to move, collaborate freely." Reginald stopped walking. "What's your turnover rate in this department?" Victor blinked. Last quarter? Roughly 16%. Is that good?" Victor looked down at his shoes. "It's better than Q2 at least." Reginald nodded. Then just as quickly, he turned and walked into a side office where a junior analyst sat eating trail mix at her desk. "Hi," Reginald said, offering a handshake. "Mind if I sit?" The woman froze. "Oh, no, please. I mean, yes, sure." He smiled, sat in the guest chair. "What's your name?" Christina Lopez." "What's your favorite part of this job, Christina?" She blinked. Probably the team. I like how we all share notes on data polls. It's not super competitive. Reginald nodded. Do people here feel heard? Christina hesitated. Some do. Some feel like it depends on who they are, or how they look. Reginald leaned back slowly in the chair, like he was letting that land. Then he stood. Thank you for your honesty, Christina. And just like that, he moved on. In the hallway, Lena walked alongside him again. You've got everyone on edge, she said lightly, trying to sound casual. I'm not here to scare anyone, Reginald replied. I'm here to see the building, not the structure, the people. Lena was quiet. Then she asked, And what did you see this morning at the front? Reginald looked at her, his tone even. I saw someone who didn't ask questions, who didn't bother to look twice, who saw what she expected to see and nothing more. Lena swallowed hard, but Reginald wasn't done walking. He had one more stop in mind, and it would be the hardest one yet. At 11:04 a.m., the elevator doors slid open. Reginald stepped out alone. No assistant, no VP, no security, just him. He walked slowly down the hall, past the bullpen where the sales team sat trying to act normal, past the strategy team with their half-finished slide decks, past the small conference room where someone had written emergency touch base on the whiteboard in shaky handwriting. He stopped at the front desk. Tina was still there, shoulders tight, hands nervously typing and deleting emails she wasn't planning to send. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there. She looked up. Their eyes met. He gave a small nod, same as before. Mr. Banks, she blurted out, standing up so fast her chair wobbled. I'm so sorry about earlier. I didn't know. I wasn't told anyone was... Reginald raised a hand gently. Can we talk for a second? Somewhere quiet? Tina blinked. Yes, of course. There's a small office just down the hall. She led the way, walking like someone being followed by a mirror. They stepped inside a tiny, unused room with a dusty chair and a single desk. She shut the door behind them. He motioned for her to sit. She did. He remained standing. He looked around the space. This'll do. Then he sat down across from her and placed his briefcase on the floor again, like it was just another meeting. You know who I am now, he said calmly. Yes, she nodded. I do. Tell me what happened this morning. Her throat tightened. I made an assumption. I didn't ask your name. I didn't check the calendar. I saw you walk in and I just thought you were delivering something. She nodded slowly. Do you usually ask visitors who they're here to see? Sometimes. I mean, if they look like they're... She caught herself. If they don't say who they are, I try to figure it out. But sometimes I guess. I know I shouldn't. He leaned forward. Why did you guess today? Tina looked down at her hands. Her fingers were clenched together so tight her knuckles turned pale. I don't know. I just saw a man in a suit with a briefcase, but my brain, it went somewhere else. I didn't even think. And now I feel stupid, embarrassed. He nodded slowly. Not stupid, human. She looked up at him. But also, he continued, you can't work at the front of the house and not see people. That's like being a security guard who doesn't lock the doors. You might think it's small, but it's the first impression that tells someone who they're dealing with. I understand, she whispered. Do you? He asked, not sharply, but sincerely. Because I wasn't offended. I wasn't mad. I've seen worse, but I was watching, and you missed an opportunity, not just with me, but with yourself. Tina's eyes were glassy now. She didn't cry, but the pressure was there. I really am sorry, she said. I believe you, Reginald replied. But let me ask you something else. He leaned back. What would you have done if I was a delivery guy? She paused. I guess. Told you to wait outside. Why? That's what I was told to do by the last office manager. He nodded again. You ever think about how that feels, making someone wait outside like they're invisible? Tina sat with that. I will now, she said softly. Reginald stood up. No one's getting fired today, Tina. That's not why I'm here. But if I walk back out there in 6 months and see the same habits, that's on you. Not policy, not a manager, you. She stood too. I understand. He opened the door. Good. Because the way you treat people, especially the ones you don't expect to matter, is the loudest thing you'll ever say. And just like that, he stepped back into the hallway, because now it was time for everyone else to have their say. The rest of the day moved like a slow, steady wave. Not a single person knew where Reginald was going next. He didn't follow a schedule. He didn't ask for slide decks. He didn't care about rehearsed talking points. He popped into rooms mid-conversation, pulled interns into chats, sat beside engineers quietly typing code, asked marketing analysts what they actually thought about the last campaign instead of what the numbers showed. And he listened, deeply, patiently, with his full attention. Some people opened up, some stumbled. A few tried to fake it, and he saw right through it every time. In the sales wing, Monique Durham, a senior account executive with 6 years at the company, found herself sitting across from him at the tall cafe table no one ever used. He leaned in, speaking low. "Tell me one thing this company does well, and one thing it absolutely doesn't." Monique didn't even hesitate. "We sell a clean product, but we ignore voices we don't like." He raised his eyebrows. "You've tried speaking up?" "Twice. Once in a town hall, once in a smaller group. Got smiles, head nods. Nothing changed." He looked her straight in the eye. "That's changing now." She nodded quietly. No big smile. Just understood. Over in operations, he stopped a guy wearing a hoodie and headphones, working at a standing desk with 3 monitors. "Name?" "Marcus. Sorry, Marcus with a K." "You like it here? Marcus with a K?" Marcus smirked. "Yeah, pays decent. I work remote most days. Today's one of the unlucky ones." Reginald chuckled. "Tell me something your manager doesn't know." Marcus shrugged. "I built a tool last year that saves us like 10 hours a week. Never really got any attention for it." "Why not?" "Wasn't flashy, just works. Quietly." Reginald nodded. "Quiet work moves mountains." Marcus looked stunned. It was the most real thing he'd heard in months. Back upstairs, Lena was meeting with a group of directors, whispering about everything from Tina's mistake to Reginald's random check-ins. One of them, Paul Nguyen, the head of strategy, leaned back and crossed his arms. "This isn't sustainable," he muttered. "People are walking on eggshells." Lena gave him a sharp glance. "Maybe they should have been doing that already." Paul frowned. "You think this is healthy?" Lena sighed. "I think it's overdue." Down on the second floor, Reginald walked into the HR suite and found Josh again, the same guy who had recognized him at the front. "You were the one who realized," Reginald said plainly. Josh nodded, a little nervous. "Thanks for not covering it up." Josh looked surprised. "I figured honesty was the safest bet." Reginald smiled faintly. "It usually is." Then his face got serious. "What's the pulse here?" "Real answer." Josh hesitated. "A little tense. Honestly, a lot of folks feel like they're not seen unless they mess up, or unless they look like the folks in charge." Reginald didn't blink. "I appreciate that." At 2:48 p.m., Reginald stepped back into the main lobby. Tina was still there. This time, she looked up immediately, met his eyes, stood straight, gave a respectful but natural, "Mr. Banks." He gave a small nod. Then he turned to the rest of the lobby, where a few others had started gathering by the windows or lingering near the front, curious. "Call everyone in," he said to Lena, who had just caught up to him. "Everyone, no titles, no teams, just people." She nodded and got to work. By 3:10 p.m., most of the office was gathered in the open common space. No microphone, no stage, just Reginald, standing in the middle like a person, not a power figure. He looked around the room. "You're all wondering what I saw today," he began. A few chuckles, some nervous smiles. "I saw talent. I saw passion. I saw people doing work that matters." He paused. "But I also saw silence where there should have been speaking, distance where there should have been care, and faces, too many faces, that looked tired of not being seen." He let it hang. "This company is changing, and that change won't come from me alone. It comes from how you treat each other, from who you ignore, from who you choose to lift up or push aside." He looked straight at Tina. She didn't look away. "Starting today, we're not doing business as usual. We're doing business with intention. And with that, The new era at Grafton Dynamics didn't just begin, it announced itself. The office was quieting down. A few people had gone back to their desks. Others just stood in small groups, talking in low voices. Tina remained at her post, watching as Reginald walked back toward the entrance with Lena beside him. But right before reaching the door, he paused. Then he turned around and walked back toward her. Again. "Do you have 5 more minutes?" he asked. Tina stood up slowly. "Of course." He motioned to the same side office they'd spoken in earlier. She followed, this time not with fear, but with something different. A need to understand. They sat again. Same seats, same space, so. But now the air felt heavier, like something needed to be said, and both of them knew it. "I wasn't always in a suit," Reginald started. "You know that, right?" Tina stayed silent. "My first job out of college was at a tech startup in Fremont. Entry-level support, answered phones, rebooted servers. They barely knew my name." He gave a small laugh, one that held more weight than humor. "On my first day, I showed up in a blazer, tried to look sharp. Woman at the desk looked at me and said, 'Janitorial's around back.' I didn't correct her, just kept walking." Tina swallowed. Reginald leaned forward. "But I remember it, not because it hurt, but because it was so normal. No malice, just assumption, casual bias, dressed up like instinct." Tina's eyes were wide now. "You never said anything?" "Nope. I wanted to see if it would happen again. It did, 4 more times." He leaned back. "That's why I didn't say anything this morning. I've lived that moment more times than I can count. But today wasn't about me." She tilted her head. "Then what was it about?" "You," he said. "You and everyone else who walks through that door. Delivery drivers, new hires, visitors, clients. You can't change the whole world, Tina, but you can change what people experience at this front desk." He let that sit for a second. "I chose to come here quiet. No announcement, no suits lined up behind me. I wanted to see what happened when no one knew who I was." Tina blinked. "And I failed." "No," he said firmly. "You made a mistake. That's different." Then he added, "You ever notice how the people who get the most grace are usually the ones who need it the least?" She nodded slowly. "I'm giving you something better than a second chance," he said. "I'm giving you clarity. What you do with it, that's on you." Her voice was quiet. "Thank you. I won't forget this." He stood up. She did too. "One more thing," he said. "Starting Monday, I want you leading a new initiative." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yeah. Internal hospitality training. Across departments. Front desk, IT, security. You'll work with HR and design a program around how we greet and treat people at every level." Tina blinked. "But what if I'm not ready for that?" He smiled. "You weren't ready this morning either. Look how far you've come since then." And with that, he walked out, not to punish the company, but to help rebuild it from the front door all the way to the top floor. The office felt different the next morning, not because of a memo, not because of some dramatic restructuring, but because people were looking at each other, at themselves, in a way they hadn't before. Tina showed up early. She stood by her desk a little straighter, spoke a little more clearly, smiled with purpose. She greeted every single person who walked in like they mattered, because they did. And when a courier dropped off a box at 9:45, she didn't point toward the door. She offered him water, asked if he needed help, wrote his name down. That's how it starts. In the days that followed, Reginald didn't send a dramatic company-wide email. He didn't post on LinkedIn about culture shock or disruption. He didn't need to. His message had already been delivered. One by one, departments started shifting. Conversations that used to stay behind closed doors started making their way into meetings. HR rolled out a listening session series. Floor managers sat in the middle of the room instead of behind glass. People noticed. And Tina, she got a new badge, Internal Culture Coordinator. She still sat at the front desk, but now she also led bi-weekly sessions with teams about perception, tone, and how easy it is to treat someone like a nobody, just because you don't expect them to be somebody. She never made the same mistake again, but more than that, she taught others not to. What happened that day wasn't just a story about a receptionist and a CEO. It was a story about sight, about what happens when you choose to see people for who they are, not what you assume they're supposed to be. Because that moment at the front desk, it happens everywhere, in every office, every school, every store. People being overlooked, misjudged, shrunk down into someone's guess instead of someone's name. We all get moments that test who we are. Tina's came when she thought no one was watching. Reginald's came when he chose not to react, but to teach. Both of them walked away changed. So here's the question. When your moment comes, when you're the one at the desk or the one being ignored, what will you do? Will you see or will you assume? Because the difference between the two isn't small, it's everything. If this story made you feel something, share it. With someone at your job, someone you work with, or someone who needs to hear it. The lesson isn't just for them, it's for all of us.